and that has to be respected.
Yes.
And Israel clearly has a right to exist, and so do the Palestinians.
They do.
The Palestinians need a state as much as Israel needs a state. So our people were not allowed to be citizens.
Yes.
The right of citizenship didn't come until 1947. Do you think that's bad enough?
Yeah.
The indigenous people weren't allowed to be citizens here until 1960.
So, Wally, you've been in the legal profession since 1966.
Yeah.
That's 58 years.
Yes.
That's more than I've been alive.
Well, I don't really look at it that way, but I guess the numbers don't lie.
So what got you into it?
Well, I was born and raised here, and my parents were early arrivals. My father came here as a very young man. He was probably 17 years old.
Yeah.
And then he went back, and that would be in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And as you know, at that time, there was an enormous amount of racism, and our people did not have the right to live here except to be laborers and to provide services for the farms and for the lumber industry.
And the railway.
Right. Yeah. And so and there were a number of Asiatic exclusion acts at the time.
Yeah. There
were Chinese and Indians here.
Yeah.
And
head taxes. Yeah.
Right, head tax and all of that.
Yeah.
And there was a Chinese Exclusion Act, and for the longest time, the Indian men who came here were rarely ever entitled to bring their wives.
That's right.
Because the government of the day, at all levels, decided that this was a white man's
country.
So they didn't want us to have children here.
Yeah.
So that's the way it was. And so my father went and married my mother in the 1930s.
Yeah.
And they came here, and he worked as a mill worker, a laborer, and went into business for a while, didn't do well.
Yeah.
And moved over to Vancouver Island.
So Lake Cowichan?
Yeah, we went to Lake Cowichan, right.
Yeah.
And he worked in a mill. He died when I was 10 years old.
Oh, my God.
And so I left my mother, a immigrant woman with little education, took care for my brother and myself.
Yeah.
And so she went to work as a housekeeper.
Mm.
And she, instilled a work ethic in us.
Yeah.
And she told us that we needed to work hard if we were to succeed.
Yes.
Many men in the community, who were the wise men, quote unquote, told my mother to take the boys back to the village.
Oh, boy.
In Punjab. Where they'll be well looked after. And my mother was always an independent woman, and she said, no, I'm going to raise my boys here. And so that's what she did.
Canada's all the better for it, and I think that's one of the reasons why you and my dad got along so well.
Right.
Parallel tracks, like his father and his grandfather arrived here in 1912.
Yeah.
Right, and then went back in 32 and had him.
Right.
He got married there.
Right.
So we're on parallel tracks.
No, you're absolutely right, Haroon.
Yeah.
And so what happened was that, as you know, our people were not allowed to be citizens.
Yeah.
The right of citizenship didn't come until 1947. Do you think that's bad enough?
Yeah.
The indigenous people weren't allowed to be citizens here until 1960. If I was my parents' age, I would never have had the right to be a lawyer, because you had to be a Canadian citizen in order to be a lawyer.
That's right.
And so we didn't have the right of citizenship. So I went to university in the 60s.
At UBC.
UBC.
Yeah.
And so I became a lawyer, and went to articled here, and went to a firm that did a lot of independent prosecutions for the government.
What was that firm called?
Called Thompson and McConnell.
Okay.
And they had an office in White Rock and one in Vancouver. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in some high-profile cases just to happen to be there.
Yeah.
And it worked out well. And so
And that was as Crown Counsel.
Yes,
and
I was a
as
special Crown prosecutor.
Yeah.
I prosecuted probably 50 to 60 homicide cases for the Attorney General's office.
Yeah.
And so it worked out well. And then after I practiced for 14 years, I was appointed to the County Court of British Columbia, and then shortly thereafter to the Supreme Court, and after that to the Court of Appeal. So
there you go. So you went from being a prosecutor to being a judge.
And I was a defense lawyer as well.
Yes, well, that's what you're doing now.
Yeah,
so you've seen
right,
all aspects of it.
Right. So I went to the Supreme Court where I was, and the Court of Appeal. I was there for 23 and a half years. And then in 2002, I guess it was, I started thinking about my future.
Yes.
How long I was very young.
Most people would have hung up the towel then. You already done enough.
Yeah. Well, I was fairly young. I was nearly 40 years old when I became a judge. Yes. Which maybe was too early. And so what happened was that I got a message from the Prime Minister, who was Paul Martin. Yes. And he wanted to see me. I had no idea what he wanted. Okay. And so we had a meeting. We had a breakfast. And he said, I want you to run for us. And maybe we'd put you as a Minister of Justice. That was thrown out to me. Yeah. And at the time, I had two kids, and they were young, and it was made clear to me that if I chose that option that he offered, that I would have to spend a lot of my time in Ottawa, providing I got elected.
That's the trade-off.
Exactly.
So I guess it didn't go down well.
No. So I thought carefully of it, and finally I, with some reluctance, said no.
So you declined.
And then 2 years later, the Premier, Gordon Campbell, called me and said, you're the ideal choice to be the next Attorney General. So I ran in 2005 for the BC Liberals, got elected, was appointed Attorney General.
So you went from working for the Attorney General's office your entire career to becoming the man himself.
Yeah, I didn't really work for the Attorney General. Yeah. I was in private practice. Yes. The Attorney General retained me to do many cases. Right. So that was my background. Yeah. So anyway, I got elected, and then I served for 4 years.
And you also acted as the Minister of
Multiculturalism. Yeah. And I wanted that because, as you know, it's in the 1960s that the Immigration Act changed.
It did.
1968. I mean, your father was very much involved.
Very active.
Because that was one of the, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the Prime Minister. And up to that time, there was a quota system for people from our community and for Asians. And
there was.
So what Prime Minister Trudeau did was he enacted a new our Immigration Act where the test would be on merit.
Correct. The point system.
Right. Yeah. And so that opened the door for so many of our people to come here.
It did.
And that changed the demographics of our community.
It did, well, remarkably, and like immigration it's what made this country what it is. In fact, we're all sons and daughters of immigrants.
Exactly. And Prime Minister Trudeau realized that, and he was a visionary, and he thought.
And Chrétien was that.
Absolutely.
I think those two as a team were the most formidable duo in Canadian
absolutely. Politics. And so that's what happened, and so everything changed. The demographics changed.
Yes.
And so the whole face of Canada changed. Yeah. So whereas at one time there were very few visible minorities in positions of trust and positions of power and influence, that opened the door for many of us. And so that's what happened. And so I was the Attorney General for 4 years.
Yeah.
During that time, we enacted what I thought was a lot of progressive legislation, particularly when it came to multiculturalism,
Yes.
to violence against women,
yes.
and so to promote our people and other visible minorities and promote multiculturalism
towards a fair and just
right.
society for everyone.
So in 1982, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was enacted, and as you know, it's the supreme law of the land, and the whole landscape changed.
Yeah.
And so I was involved in all of that. So,
yeah. Oh, you helped to actually tailor the fabric of the society which we all live in. And you continue to do so.
Yeah.
You know, so you look at age, and age is nothing but a number. And you've remained very active. You remain remarkably healthy. You're very fit. You're the best dressed lawyer and judge. You're famous for your sartorial fashions, and you're a man about town, and continue to do so. So, what's your secret? How do you?
You know what? I don't know if I have a secret. I do the best I can. I go to the gym most mornings. Workouts, try to eat healthy if I can, and that's what I do. So
that's good.
So I could say the same about you.
Yes, indeed.
Well,
indeed.
Yeah.
So one of the most profound things that you did as a commissioner, because you acted as a commissioner for a number of things, and one of the most tragic stories that you had to deal with, with many witnesses, heard horrific stories, and this was the inquiry of missing women that disproportionately really focused on Aboriginal women who were missing and murdered. And just recently, Robert Pickton, the notorious killer, got street justice in a jail, and he was killed. He was in a coma, slipped away. Some deserve that this was justice served in a jail cell. But do you feel, what is the role of justice for these people?
First of all, Pickton was the most prolific killer in Canadian history.
Yes.
He admitted killing 49 women.
Yeah.
We think he killed probably closer to 100.
Yeah, well, the remains were there.
Right. So after he was convicted and sentenced, the mini group, particularly the indigenous groups, cried out for justice. Say, what happened? Why was he allowed to get away with this?
Yeah.
How did he conduct illegal activities under the noses of the police? So the government appointed me as a commissioner to do a complete investigation and an inquiry. Right. So that took 3 years. We had many days of public hearings, and we heard from over 100 witnesses.
Yes. We
went into the villages of the north along Highway 16, went into Gitnao, Kitwanga, Morristown, Hazelton, and we interviewed and spoke to the indigenous communities.
Yes.
And we learned very quickly that one of the reasons that Pickton was permitted to get away with his illegal activities was nobody paid attention.
Because he was a white guy.
To the vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And most of them were drug addicted.
Yeah.
They were often poor.
Marginalized.
Indigenous.
Yes.
And so they became sex trade workers, and nobody cared for them. So Pickton took advantage of that, and the police made many errors by not taking the complaints of the parents, the mothers who came to the police and complained about their daughters being missing. Nobody cared.
Nobody cared. And well, you actually served on another committee to reform the Policing Act.
Yes.
As well. So in terms of these recommendations, and here we are, fast forward to 2024, there's still violence against marginalized people on the Lower East Side. There is a lot of upset, right? So if you look at the police departments, VPD, RCMP, you've got the security agencies, a lot of people feel targeted by their race, their gender, their political leanings, all of these things, and it becomes a complicated issue. I think one of the things that you've always been a proponent of, and I've always been a proponent of, is that the police force should be reflective of the community
Yeah.
that's being policed, much like government, much like
Yeah.
every facet in life. So how do we achieve that?
Well, the first inquiry in policing I did
Yeah.
was in the 90s.
Yeah.
And that was one of the issues.
Yeah.
What should be the makeup of the police?
Yeah.
And as you quite correctly stated,
Yeah.
if any institution is going to have credibility,
Yeah.
then it has to, in some way, reflect the general makeup of the population.
Correct.
So if you have a population that is 40% visible minority,
Yeah.
maybe we should strive towards that, to have policing and the medical profession, the legal profession, and business, academia, in some way generally reflect the general makeup of the community. And so we recommended that strongly in the report that we put in 1994. The report is called Closing the Gap.
Yes.
Closing the gap between the police and the community.
Yeah.
So a lot of good things have come out of that.
Yeah.
And we're moving forward. But the system, as you point out, is not perfect.
It is.
There's still too many police forces. A lot of the issues fall between the
communication too.
Exactly.
They're missing and they're stepping over each other.
That's right. And that's what happened in Picton.
Yeah.
The women were being taken from the downtown east side of Vancouver, an area policed by the VPD, Vancouver Police Department, and they were taken to Coquitlam, where they were murdered on the Picton farm.
Yeah.
And that's an area policed by the RCMP. They didn't share information.
Yeah.
Had they shared information, a lot of the lives have been saved.
Yes.
So we recommended strongly that there be some kind of regional policing system where the police work together, the different agencies work together, so they can share information.
Yeah.
And that's in every serial killer that's ever come down the road over the years, from Clifford Olson to Bernardo to...
Sure. Well, Clifford Olson, when I was a child, I was in elementary school, like when Clifford Olson was on that rampage.
That's right.
And reading those accounts of what happened to those kids, I really felt that was a defining moment for a whole generation of us, because we realized nobody's safe.
Well, the kids were vulnerable.
They were kids.
Kids were taken advantage of.
Yeah.
Nobody cared for them. And you have multiple police forces.
Yes. And
all involved in the investigation, not sharing information. And it took some time before they apprehended him. The same thing happened to Picton.
Yes.
Picton was caught quite fortuitously, because what had happened was he was a suspect, but there wasn't enough work done on the ground to actually go and arrest him. So what happened was that there was a rookie constable named Nathan Wells, and he was looking for weapons. So someone told him there were illegal weapons
on
at the Picton farm.
Yes.
So he went to the Picton farm with a search warrant to look for weapons.
Yes.
Lo and behold, he found the remains of women there.
Oh.
And that's what happened in 2002.
Yes.
And the women started disappearing in the 80s.
In the 80s, So the number is many times the reported.
So tragic mistakes were made. And we think, as a result of the inquiry that we did, that a lot of changes have been made. At one stage, when women would go missing, would go to the police to report a missing daughter or a son, the police would simply say, well, there's no law against going missing. What do you expect us to do?
What do you expect? They'll be back. They'll turn up tomorrow or the next day.
Right. Well, now, as a result of our inquiry, if there's a vulnerable child or woman that goes missing,
you get
police have a mandatory duty to conduct an investigation and report back to the families. So things have changed. There's more cooperation now between policing agencies, but maybe there's still too many police forces.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more cohesion. Even having a number of departments or having stuff specifically for the Indigenous and Aboriginal peoples, liaisons, psychiatric health workers. I think one of the great tragedies of BC was the closing of Riverview Hospital.
Yes.
Riverview Hospital, if people were out of order, and whether that was mentally or on drugs, because right now the greatest serial killer
Yeah.
in the world is the illicit drugs. It's
Yeah.
the drugs that are killing people.
Yeah.
It's like every day
Yeah.
there are scores of people dying, and it's an epidemic. We're an addicted city.
Yeah.
Vancouver's a port city.
Yeah.
It always has been,
Yeah.
from from opium,
Yeah.
around the turn of the century,
Right.
to all the synthetic drugs that are out there now.
Right.
It's wreaking havoc on
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
It's destroying families, and it's something that that is causing quite a lot of trauma. Our streets are not safe. Like we had introduced via the province of BC legislation to decriminalize drug use in public places. Now they've recriminalized it because it didn't quite work out.
Well, what happened was that they didn't consult the people who are living there, and no one wants to come home and find someone shooting up
and you would
in their front door.
I've seen it. I've seen it over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying.
I think the province was right in that they wanted to decriminalize it and to assist addicts who needed help. But you got to go a step further and have treatment. You can't simply feed the illegal or the improper habit that has adverse reactions to your health.
Yes.
You
need an intervention.
Exactly.
And so this is, again, going back to Riverview. Yeah. Riverview was a place where you could house them.
Right.
They would have dignity.
Yeah.
There's no dignity living on the street. There's no dignity in selling yourself. Yeah. There's no dignity in in being so out of your mind on drugs, where you're literally in paralysis. Yeah. They can't move. They can't talk. Yeah. They're hunched over. Yeah. A lot of them have developed spinal problems. Yeah. Almost irredeemable dangers to their brain.
Yes.
Right? Like, and essentially they're on disability the rest of their life. Yeah. Yeah. And there's better hope for them if we treat people as human beings, as equals, as we all are. Yeah. We really simply can't let the current system stand the way it is.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be a good idea to reopen Riverview or something like it for people, even say they want voluntary drug treatment? But sometimes if a person is out of control, they would be taken. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm an expert in that. However, I don't think the closing of Riverview with its facilities was a good idea.
It wasn't.
In the absence of any other facility or any other form of treatment.
Yes.
So we simply can't have people walking the streets of Vancouver who are mentally ill and who are a danger to themselves and to other people.
Yeah, and,
so we need to
that is the definition of, well, then you need to be hospitalized.
Exactly.
You need treatment.
Yeah.
When you're a danger to yourself and the people around you, those are the magic words.
Yeah.
To say, hey, look, you need help. Whether you like it or not, you're a danger to yourself and to the society around you. That treatment needs to be mandated.
Right.
But the way the law works right now, they'll say, no, I'm fine. And they're left on the street, and then you find them.
Yeah, right? I think we have to think of a mandatory treatment.
Yeah, I do, and I would advocate for that too.
And I know that has some drawbacks, but we need to take a progressive approach outside the box.
I would agree, because at the end of the day, look, people are free. You have the freedom to do what you like.
Right.
But when it gets to the point again where you're harming yourself and the people around you, some choices need to be made for the good of society.
Then society has a stake in what you're doing. Society has a role, because if you're a danger to yourself and you're a danger to other people, then there's an obligation on the part of the state to intervene.
That's right. So dangers to self and dangers to community. Now, internationally, we look at the world, and the world is a tinderbox, as you know. So it's been a very strange time. And so Israel and Palestine, there have been talk of a ceasefire taking hold. It's still embryonic at this point. It's been nearly 8 months. And there's no sugarcoating it. There's no other word for it. It's an unfolding genocide that's been perpetrated on the Palestinian people. The International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice have all indicated and stated plainly that plausible genocide is happening. that the conditions of genocide are occurring and they're being perpetuated. So many acts of violence, acts of mass murder on innocent people. And, of course, October 7th happened.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. And any loss of civilian life, whether it's Israeli, Palestinian, or anybody, it's wrong, right? But when you're illegally occupied, you have an obligation and a right to defend yourself and fight for freedom. 1994, in the aftermath of apartheid in South Africa. So over there at that time, that was the cause célèbre of that time. And I was a young man, I was a student. We marched for it. Free Nelson Mandela, free South Africa, boycott, divest, and sanction South Africa. And you know what? It worked.
Yeah.
It worked. There was such a groundswell. Protests, people, civil disobedience, demonstrations, all of it worked.
Yeah.
And South Africa is a free country.
Yeah.
Right now, we have encampments at your alma mater, at UBC, at universities across the country here, the US, and Europe. Those students are being harassed.
Yeah.
Those students are being doxxed. They're being threatened. They're being censored and censured. People are saying, well, we're not going to hire you. Some people have chosen not to graduate. Some people, once they've developed their conscience, because as you know, university, when you're in that place of higher education, or even if you're in the school of hard knocks, once you grow to a certain point, you realize, look, there's a difference between what's right and what's wrong. And people have clearly seen, like we call it, was it prima facie evidence, right? Like there's no doubt of it. And but for a judge, you being a judge or we being a judge, the impartiality, you go where the evidence takes you. And the evidence is there. And it's very clear and plain to see. But for a lot of folks, just by saying the word genocide, they're censored. They're censured.
Yeah, I don't think we should be afraid of any terminology. I think what we should concentrate on is in the Middle East particularly, there has to be a two-party,
two-state solution.
Two-state solution.
Yes.
And those parties have been there for centuries in some form or another, and that has to be respected.
Yes.
And Israel clearly has a right to exist, and so do the Palestinians.
They do.
The Palestinians need a state as much as Israel needs a state.
So to get to that point where right now a fragile ceasefire, God willing, will take hold. And then we have to think about what will happen then. What's Canada's role?
Well, Canada historically has had a peace-keeping role as a neutral party. So Canada's got to be careful in that we can't be seen to be taking sides. If we can be an honest broker and give advice to both sides, Canada will have fulfilled its obligation. And I think that's what we should do. And I mean, there's innocent killings that are going on, innocent violence, and against people who are caught up in the middle. That has to be addressed.
Yes. So the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, those institutions were formed in the aftermath of World War II and the Holocaust. Right. So, and it's based on the fundamental principle that all people are should and must be treated equally. The application of the law must be made equally. So, in my view and in the view of many, there's a double standard when it comes to Israel. For Palestine, they're fighting for their lives, they're fighting for their freedom, but they're seen as terrorists, right? There's a lot of real issues going on around semantics. And one of the things that happened once this thing started, in the weeks that started, everyone was horrified. Oh, Hamas. I was speechless, to be honest. I was speechless when it happened. I didn't know what to say. But then once I saw a bit more of it, you say, okay, well, it was terrible what happened and, shouldn't have happened. But it's a jailbreak, right? Like they're living in a jail. And it's been swept open for the entire world to see what is happening. You have an apartheid state, right? And where there are separate rights for others and separate rights for the Israeli people. I have no hate for anybody. You've known me since I was a kid, Wally. And multiculturalism has been embedded in my being. And I've seen an uptick in Islamophobia. I've seen an uptick in anti-Semitism. And I think we do a disservice when we here outside of the conflict zone uh, take a very unjust action to our friends and neighbors. Because at the end of the day, like, we're all friends and neighbors here together, but we're in such a place where, yes, we can have these dialogues, we can have these conversations. So for Canada to make a difference, it really starts with the individual. And the students out there that are really putting the time in, giving of their professional future, maybe even completely waylaying what their future would be for the principle of the matter. It shows an incredible amount of bravery. And it's something that gives me a glimmer of hope for
I would think so. I mean, I think the first step would be a ceasefire, so that people can collectively look at this thing, look at the all the issues, and come up with a proper solution, solution wherein the rights of all parties are respected.
Correct.
That's what needs to be done. I mean, certainly the innocent suffering and the violence that's taken place simply is not acceptable. And so there has to be a compromising of views, and the people need to sit down together and decide what's in the public interest and in the interest of everybody.
And the precedent is there, because the reality is, look, wars have happened. Wars have happened across many generations for as long as humanity has been here. There's been war, there's been peace, there's been prosperity, there's been famine, there's been poverty. And in order to uplift the dignity of some people, you uplift the dignity of all people. And to work towards that, that's something that Canada quite rightfully has been seen as an upholder of that. But what I've seen during this whole thing is the timidness of our leadership to where they're really waltzing around how to phrase a sentence or how to phrase a motion about this. And in the end, when you're trying to please all people all the time, you please no one. To really see very strategic and very definitive communication by our country that's representative of the citizens of the country. If you took a poll right now, I would hazard to guess that most believe that this is one of the most unjust situations that's going on in the world right now. And we need to do something about it. It's just a reality.
No, I agree. And this is no time for people being timid. We need some bold solutions, and hopefully something will come of that.
Well, I believe there was an old song, "The kids are all right."
You're right.
So, shifting gears a bit, yesterday there was a report on the disruption from foreign governments into the affairs of the government of Canada. And that's something that a number of MPs have been snared, either previous MPs and others have a microscope on them. We've had extrajudicial killings on Canadian soil, notably this Najjar, the Khalistani Sikh leader who was assassinated at the foot of his temple, and he was a proponent for Khalistan. Those killings, Trudeau had offered evidence that it was state-sponsored act. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm like a lot of people. I don't know the facts. Certainly, the killing of Mr. Najjar was clearly wrong. It's a crime.
It is.
He has a right to live. He's in Canada. And he's a Canadian citizen. So that act was wrongful. And so there are two people who are charged now. So we'll have to wait to see what the outcome of the trial is going to be. I'm not prepared to jump to conclusions.
Of course.
And to point the finger at anybody or any nation. I'd like to see what evidence is that emerges in a courtroom.
Of course, of course. And again, justice and the law, right?
Yes.
And it's weighing it. As a judge, when a case comes before you, and you've got a prosecutor who's laying out the facts or their opinion, their version of the fact, and the defendant comes in, you've had to come up with some very difficult decisions when each is arguing with ferocity and conviction. They believe their position, or it's a he said, she said, or whatever the case may be. What really compels you to deliver a verdict that serves the cause of justice?
Well, that's a difficult task of a judge.
Yeah.
You have to look at both sides of an issue, and you need to come up carefully with the right decision, particularly if you're in a criminal courtroom, because you don't have the luxury of a wrongful conviction. You can't do that.
No.
That's the greatest injustice that can take place under our system for wrongful convictions. Fortunately.
And many of them have happened.
Exactly. Yeah. So we need to do that. And so the task, the jobs of judges are very difficult. And you have to use common sense. You have to rely on the lawyers. You have to rely on the law. You have to rely on your own intuition and common sense.
And so do you go with your gut? Do you go with your mind?
Well, you have to, more than your gut, you have to be logical and think carefully and weigh the evidence carefully before you decide on a particular solution, a particular decision.
And so once a decision is made, and either there's a penalty of jail or financial restitution or a combination of both, how do you get to some redemption?
Well, the first thing you got to realize is that no two offenders are the same. No two circumstances of an offense are the same.
Yes.
So the decision has to be tailored for the particular circumstances of the offense and the background of the offender.
Yes.
So, and you have to be fair. So while a person may have committed a serious crime, there are a number of factors that are involved. Is this the first time the person has committed the crime? Does the person have a criminal record? What are the circumstances? Was the person in such a disadvantaged state that this was inevitable? How much planning went into it? What are the extenuating circumstances? All of those factors need to be considered. And also, we know that the vast majority of people who commit crimes do so for the first and only time in their lives. I know we have repeat offenders.
We do.
But the vast majority of people that have committed a crime have done so for the first time. So now you have to make sure that while that person has to pay his or her debt to society, we don't want to make it onerous so the person, by giving a long period of incarceration, becomes damaged. And so, because prisons are not a good place to be.
No.
And once you get into incarcerated facilities, very few people come out the same. So you have to make sure, particularly for young offenders, one of the things you need to do is you have to rehabilitate.
Yes.
It's the law. So you got to do that. So so a number of factors that you need to consider.
Yeah, no, it's a long journey, and you've been on that journey for a long time. Going back to politics, so you served as the Attorney General, the Minister of Multiculturalism with Gordon Campbell, and then Christy Clark, I guess. And so I met Christy a few weeks back, so I encourage her to jump back in. So any prospects of you re-entering the political field?
No, I don't think so. I think I've had my run. Yeah. I'm a practicing lawyer. I mediate cases, and I try to help people who are in trouble. Yeah. So that's my job.
No,
I'm quite happy.
I've seen you do it, and you're very masterful at that. The political landscape right now, so currently the provincial election is in the offing, and we've got the NDP head by David Eby, we've got the BC United Party, Kevin Falcon, and the Conservative Party, which is making a lot of noise, I think because they have the same logo as the federal Conservative Party. So they're having a resurgence. But there was a candidate who had a big party just a couple of days ago. His name is Asid Gondal. Asid is the president of the BC Muslim
I see.
Association, and he took some thought. He says, "Okay, I'm going to run." And the day after the big party, welcome, here you go,
Yeah.
fully crowded, packed banquet hall. I enjoyed the fish pakora, and the tea and the jalebi and all the
Yeah.
sweets. The very next day, a press release came out, and so some of the statements that Mr. Gondal made as the president of the BCMA, as a Muslim, as a
Yeah.
father, as a community member, he uttered a word that we talked about earlier. He characterized what is happening in Israel and Palestine, Gaza in particular. It's a genocide. He also said he made statements with respect to SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity that's being laid out in schools. And it's very purpose-built that families and parents have the right as to whether their kids should take this education or not. It should be age appropriate, and the parents should have the right to opt out their kids. Those comments, Kevin Falcon turfed him. So he lasted not even 24 hours as the candidate. And I know this is kind of fresh news for you, but these conversations have to be had. If you're a member, if you're reflective of your community, the communities in which you run, and our community, whether you're Sikh or Hindu or Muslim or a lot of the various communities that are out there, they're conservative and very mature in their decision making, and they want to take care of their kids. They believe kids should be kids. All these things. And but when you're dictated what to do, you're going to get your back up, and especially when kids come involved, the social justice issue with Palestine, people have an opinion. To go and run for public office and not be able to take a stand of your own convictions, I think, frankly, is quite ridiculous. So he got tossed. I've urged him to run as an independent. And I think there should be more independent candidates running, because if you can't make an opinion for yourself, what bloody good is it? What good is it for? So,
I don't know anything about the facts of the case, but I agree with you. There has to be an open discussion. We live in a country that we cherish freedoms, freedom of speech and freedom of association, and all of those are fundamental freedoms. And a person ought to have the right to make a statement as long as it's civil, as long as it doesn't promote violence.
Exactly.
So I don't know what happened, and
Well, going back to Pierre Elliott Trudeau, one of the great leaders of our country, the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation.
Right.
So sexual orientation, it's your business, right?
Yeah.
Like, I honestly don't give a damn.
Yeah.
With, like, who you love, who you're with, whatever your gender is, whatever your orientation is, that's your life.
Yeah.
That's your life, and you be you. Right?
Yeah.
And I believe that folks that believe in the traditional family structure, they should be respected.
Right.
And the rights that they have as parents over their children should also be respected.
Right.
So difficult conversations, but these are the things.
Well,
that
I've enjoyed this conversation.
They have to be.
Before we close,
yes,
I want to say something about your dad.
Yes.
I'm a huge admirer of what your dad did. Razak Ali Khan was everywhere where he was needed and where there was a need for people who needed help.
Yeah.
And he was there to help people. He was an active civil rights advocate. He cared for people who really were vulnerable, and particularly at a time there was a lot of racism. And he helped people, and he was an articulate spokesperson for our community. So I just wanted to tell you that. So I knew him.
No, I know you did, and you've given me words of solace and comfort.
Yeah.
It's been 21 years since he passed, and it's our whole world turned upside down. It
Yeah.
still is really.
Yeah,
Like,
well, you never get over
you
that.
never get over
You're
it.
not
Like,
going to get over that.
no,
So,
never.
yeah.
And I compartmentalize my life.
Yeah,
And
no,
I do things, and I get busy.
He was,
But, yeah.
you know what? I still see him with that smile he had on his face, and he always he was very reluctant to. He didn't want to make waves, but at the same time, he took stands.
He did.
Yeah, and he did that. And he in 1998, I went to India, Pakistan, and Italy
Yes.
with the Governor General, and he put me in touch with the Attorney General in Pakistan. And I went to Islamabad, and they had a big dinner for me, and it was because of what your father had done, opening doors for me there. So,
He did. He did. Well, one of the things that my dad, like, he loved that country, but he loved Canada so much.
Yeah.
And it's a special place, and we all have an obligation to make Canada as great as it can be. I would like to say one more thing just before we wrap, and another thing about my dad afterwards. Imran Khan. So when he did come to Canada, you in fact introduced Imran Khan to the stage at his visit here in Vancouver. He's currently imprisoned. It's been almost a year. On trumped-up charges.
That's terrible that a person who has different political views from you should be incarcerated. I met Imran Khan actually on the trip that I spoke to.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay,
it was in Lahore, in Pakistan.
Yes.
I met him.
Yeah.
And it was at there was at Eid. That's what it was, during a festive season. And we were having dinner at a person's house, and he was there, and I sat next to him, and we talked and talked. We had a long conversation.
Yeah.
So, and I also met a very courageous woman, Jenagir.
I know the woman you're talking about, Jen.
I met her.
Hi.
She fought for the rights of women.
Yes.
And
very esteemed.
Yeah. And I just regrettably I can't remember her last name, but she was a true feminist. And when I got back here, I told Simon Fraser University about her.
Yes.
And they brought her out here, and they gave her an honorary degree.
Amazing.
And she was just a remarkable woman. So I met two people that.
So, well, there you go. Well, we all touch people's hearts, and I think that's one of the things. And you've always touched mine. You've always given me advice. Like I've known you for a long time, and I've always been very fortunate to have your name.
Both ways.
Yes, yeah. Well, you've called me too. That's true. That is a two-way street. And so for my dad, he took me to a courtroom where somebody was being prosecuted, and my dad had to advocate for that guy. And he came and he saw you, and you were in your judge's robes, and you're like, okay, and you would meet.
No, your dad was always there to help people who needed help.
He did.
And
he did. Yeah.
So good.
So this is the work that we do.
Good.
We all have to do the work.
Right.
And you're doing great work.
Okay. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. It was an honor. Let's do this again.
All right. Anytime.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
All right.